Okay, so here we are in Module 4, and you're going to be producing your first longer paper. This time it's the Inquiry and Research Interest essay, and those are listed right down here. It should also be available in the syllabus and course materials. It's not there yet, but I'll put it right there. But you have it right there in Module 4, so let's take a look at that first. And you'll be able to see I've changed the dates, so make sure you're using the new dates ever since the coronavirus crisis hit us. But you'll see that once again you're able to use whatever you found most interesting to you. So you can use Emerson's Nature, Thoreau's Walking, Jewett's A White Hare, and you could write more about Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God if you'd like. You can write about that and Leslie Marmon Silko's Ceremony. Anything that we've been reading and talking and discussing online is fair game for this. So and as I've said in the past, you should be thinking this. I've tried to design this course so that you're doing things the way that we do things in the discourse of literary scholarship. And so whatever interests you, continue to follow through on it. So if you've written a response and reflection essay about some question at issue that really interests you a great deal, and you want to continue to work on that now and start to do research into it, that's fine for this Inquiry and Research Interest essay if you want to do that. If you're going to be writing about Silko's Ceremony, which is a novel which, as you can tell, has just a multitude of topics, opening topics that open you up to a lot of different ideas. And everything that I've been reading from you folks, the discussion boards, shows me that you're all very interested in what's going on in the novel and in many of the different topics that arise out of it. As I talked to you about in the last video, there's a list of topics, and there are a lot more than that, I'm sure you can see. But anyway, so this is the next step in our class. You will see from the modules in the, let's see, it is this whole class discussion, which is due Monday the 6th. I'm asking you to look at and think about some kinds of literary criticism. I gave you a brief document there, and I'm asking you to start thinking in terms of research. So when I say come up with a research plan here, basically that just means you have to figure out some kind of search terms. You have to go through the process that we've already laid out, which is I'll go now to the inquiry flow chart that we looked at probably a few weeks ago. This is basically the simple process of inquiry and the writing process for what we're doing in this class. And so, of course, you have to come up with a topic first. Then you need to kind of locate and focus on a specific question at issue. All of you have already started to do all of these things. Then you dive into the inquiry, the serious, deep inquiry. And that's where you start doing your research. And as you're looking into things and finding new documents and new ideas, this is where it should help you to narrow and focus still more your research, so that you are starting to really come up with some interesting ways to conclude your question at issue, to come to a conclusion about your question at issue. And that the research is something that really does have a lot to do with generating the process that you're going through and the ideas that are coming into your mind and that you're using when you're writing. Another way to look at this is the research arc, and this is also a document that's available in our course, in the course materials, the syllabus and course materials. It's similar to the other document. It basically has the same kinds of questions. You start with a topic, you go through your initial research, what's of interest, what is at issue, who says what, how much is out there, and those things should help you to form a better question at issue. So that initial research is really a way for you to hone your question at issue. Then you dive into the serious inquiry. So if you are looking into post-traumatic stress and Native American soldiers in the 1940s and 50s, and you go online and find some interesting source material, either secondary or primary source material, it should maybe help you to really think more clearly about, like, let's say you looked into it and found that there were specific papers written by the Army Medical Corps regarding different kinds of treatment for different kinds of post-traumatic stress in, say, the 1970s or 80s. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, it was called battle fatigue post-Civil War, post-World War II. This is where you're diving into the inquiry, and as you're into that process, you're looking for your conclusion that answers your question issue, which is what we were going to call the thesis, and you all already know what a thesis is. That's where you're also going to be thinking about your audience. What are the parts in your logic, the argument that you're making, the materials that you're seeing that are in need of further development. This will send you back to deeper inquiry. Maybe go back and do more research. Are there parts in need of further research? Once you get all of this material, and if you're writing to yourself in this process, as you're going through this inquiry process, if you're writing to yourself, keeping notes to yourself, stopping after you read, say, an article, or you find a newspaper regarding some aspect of your topic, and you read through the newspaper article or the magazine article, or the introduction to a book or what have you, that would, if you write to yourself about these things and how they're helping to answer your question issue, you will have much of the material already put together by the time you come up with your thesis and to go into the process of composition. That's when you have to stop and think to yourself, now, how do I want to tell my reader what this is all about? How do I want to tell my reader what my question is? How do I want to develop the question, explain the various parts, the reasons, the background behind the question, why I'm interested in it, why it's important and significant, and then, do I give them the thesis right off the bat? Do I need to spend a couple of pages developing the background before I tell them what my conclusion is? You might even want to have your conclusion come at the very end, right? That's a deductive. You can induce somebody towards coming to your same conclusion, or you can deduce by giving them the conclusion first and then talking about how you came to it. That's the most standard method, is present your thesis someplace near the beginning, but it doesn't really matter as long as what works is that you're describing for your reader the process that you went through to come to a conclusion. So this is and the reason why I made this research arc is this is about time. These are things that happen over a period of time. We've just been reading this wonderful novel, Ceremony, which is, where, as one of my students in my face-to-face class put it, Theo has become unstuck in time, and I think he was quoting from Kurt Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse-Five, about Billy Pilgrim, who was somebody else who becomes unstuck in time after a traumatic experience during the Second World War as well. In his case, it's the Dresden firebombing of the city of Dresden. So anyway, this is the process, and how much time do you have to go through this process? This is what this research arc is for you to think about how much time you have to go through this process. And in this case, you have a couple of weeks now, so you should be thinking about your topic. If you're going to be looking into one of the earlier texts, if you're going to go back and write your 4-page inquiry and research interest essay on one of the earlier texts, then you may already have your topic and you've probably already done some of the initial research. This is why the response and reflection, the short 1-page essays, might be very useful for you. And please remember, as you're doing this, that I'm going to ask you to take one of the 2 inquiry and research interest essays and expand upon it for the final research essay. So really, as you're doing this work, you're getting work done for the very end of the semester as well. So this is the inquiry process and the research and composition process. You all are probably right at this point at the phase where you're trying to think about a topic, unless you already have one. You're starting to do initial research, and the reason why I gave you this assignment, find it again, some kinds of literary criticism assignment, is that it's really just another way for you to think about a topic and to kind of narrow and focus yourself. If you're interested in eco-criticism, I have an example that I placed in Module 2. It's an essay that I wrote some years ago about Thoreau and his process for examining the landscape and thinking about his own environment. But eco-criticism is really basically, the questions are about concepts of nature and human relationships and the interpretation of a work of literature or a work of art. Feminist criticism is about how gender was really be looking at how aspects of gender organize organized societies, the ideologies behind them, and how you see that in a work of art. Marxist criticism really looks at an idea of the dialectic, which is the kind of opposing forces that Marx laid out in his Das Kapital and his Communist Manifesto. You can find all kinds of information about Marxism and Marxist criticism. Cultural criticism looks at like multiculturalism, race, and ethnicity. Obviously, that would be very interesting to look at in relation to our the two novels that we're reading for this class, to start with this class. Historicist goes back and looks in history, and you dive into the historical context. And then psychoanalytic criticism would be using the works of any kind of concept of psychology and how it figures into either the creation of a work of literature or how it's developed in a work of literature. So obviously in Ceremony, there's a lot of interesting material about the kind of psychological condition that Theo is struggling through as he starts to become healthier and healthier by going through his Ceremony. This is the next phase in research, and you've got a couple of weeks now before this next one is due. And please remember, with this coronavirus crisis that we're going through right now, all late policies have been suspended. So just try to get things in on time so that you can have some information and feedback from your colleagues about the materials that you're producing and the discussions that you're engaged in. But if things are not working out and you need to have a little bit of extra time, don't worry about it. I'm not going to be charging anybody with any kind of late penalties. So that's the end of that. Thanks.